Hey, folks, this is Harold Goldberg. I'm a journalist, writer, founder of the New York Video Game Critics Circle, and I'm here with Evan Narcisse. And Evan has done so many great things in writing, from journalism to uh, comic books to video games. I have done some video games, some books, and a couple of scripts for film. So we are here to tell you about how we moved from writing about games to other media, other cool media. So, Evan, can you first tell me how you got involved with writing? I know it's a weird question to ask a writer, but we all had to start somewhere.
Yeah. As a kid, I was always a really avid reader, right? So I read voraciously. Um, Comic books were obviously a big part of that. And I always wanted to write. I remember somewhere in some attic or some box somewhere, I've got a paper from fifth grade about Rosie Greer. We had to do a research paper, and it was about Rosie Greer, who was a football player who later became an actor. Um, and the teacher complimented me on my writing and said I was a good writer. And uh, you know, that was a pretty encouraging moment early on in my academic career. And then, I kind of always wanted to write. In high school, I knew I wanted to write. Even my mom tried to discourage me because she was worried I'd be broke my entire life, and she was mostly right. Um, but that desire to want to write continued into college, right? And I went to NYU where I did a pre-law kind of prerequisites, right? And political science. And the first constitutional law course I took, I bounced off of it really hard. I didn't think I was going to be able to go to law school or do what my mom wanted me to do. Meanwhile, I'd taken a journalism course just to fill out some credits, and my professor, who wound up kind of being my mentor, Professor David Dent, who's still at NYU, as far as I know, he's like, "Hey, you really can write. We should get you into the journalism program." So we did, and you know, that's how I kind of got started as a journalist. From there, I was a fact checker at Teen People magazine, and that's really where I started writing about video games and pop culture. I was a fact checker; that was my day job, but basically, I was also able to freelance for the same magazine, writing about these different things. And from there, I kind of got my name out there. I guess I think that's where I was working the first time we met, Harold. I was working at Teen People.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
yeah. I think that's right.
and then lots of twists and turns along the way. But I don't want to get into all of that. But that's how I got started, and I started covering video games from the very beginning. The magazine I worked at the time, Teen People, was a lot more gender neutral, right? So it wasn't like about girls stuff or boys stuff. It was about like stuff that young people in general were into. And I was like, video games are youth culture, and we should be covering it. And I'm the guy who should be covering it. So I'm an entertainment editor who, kind of championed my cause, and that's how I got started writing about video games. But I'd always played video games my entire life.
Yeah, yeah, and same here. I mean, I remember uh, teacher in high school suggesting that, oh, you like writing? I see you have some talent. Do you want to write for the not the newspaper, but the city newspaper? So I began writing about sports at the age of 13 for the local uh, Lackawanna front page, I guess it was called, and it taught me a lot. I mean, the one thing, I was sick a lot at that time, like really badly sick. So, and somehow when my uncle gave me his typewriter, it just really clicked and made me feel like at one with words or something like that. And so, as I continued writing. I began to write in college about music, and that led to career in pop music features and criticism. So I would interview folks like Miles Davis and Sun Ra and Ray Davies and Joe Strummer. I was a real big punk rock fan. Then changed to writing about film, but and interviewed lots of fun and famous folks. But I remember buying a Pentium computer in the 1990s for about $3,000 and
Wow.
getting yeah, right. I know, man. It was like I spent every penny I had, and you and I know when we're starting out. There ain't no money, man.
Nope.
There's nobody at all. So this was a major investment for me, but I think it was a good one. It got me to review um, 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 CD-ROMs and games for Entertainment Weekly, and Entertainment Weekly was a pretty hot magazine at the time. So that kind of and EW was forward thinking in the sense that they too, same parent company, 18 people, they too wanted to do video games. So I had the rig at the time, so I was able to write about them. Um, I mean, so we're let's say we're both doing journalism. I think I was sending out poetry at the time as well. I mean, did we always think beyond journalism to do something else, or did it fall into your lap, Evan, through contacts you made in journalism?
Yeah, no, I never thought of myself as anything other than a journalist and a cultural critic. Like that was always what I wanted to do. I was happiest doing that stuff. You know, um, and I was chugging along. I saw that as my craft, as my art, and I was honing my skills and sharpening stuff as I went along. Um, but it everything changed for me when somebody asked me if I want to write comics. That editor was Will Moss at Marvel Comics, and um, I'd done a series of interviews with Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's writing the main Black Panther title at the time and still is. He and I were friends, and so I couldn't review his work critically, but I could interview him, and I did. And his editor noticed, is like, "Hey, Evan really seems to know his Black Panther stuff. Do you feel like he'd be interested in writing a project for us?" And they asked, and once I got clearance from my bosses at the Gizmodo Media Group, and we kind of cleared a carve out for me to not have a conflict of interest. It was set to do that. So I'm writing the comic's coming out, and people, you know, in other media that I'd written about, so in animation and in video games, they're like, "Oh, you can do this too, like, or you want to do this too," and they reached out to me. And I've been lucky enough to be able to pursue like a different kind of writing in those areas. The first
Yeah.
company that reached out to me was Insomniac about Miles Morales, um, uh, and I wound up consulting on that game. But Harold, you said you've been writing poetry as well as journalism. Like, talk to me about the different um, mindsets you have to enter for each of those disciplines. Does anything cross over from one to the other? Um, did your worlds ever collide?
That's really a good question, man. I had written poetry. I think the first poem I wrote was in the hospital, and I just was like really sick, and I heard a song that moved me, so I wrote about the song. But in the 1990s here in New York, there was this awesome place, and there still is, called the Nuyorican Poets Cafe. And it's a spoken word joint down on the Lower East Side. And at the time, you had to kind of step over needles and stuff to get to the place. But it was really, there was a lot of great stuff happening. Paul Beatty came out of the Nuyorican. Maggie
One of my
Estep did his yeah, and Paul Beatty is like, yeah, it was one of my favorites as well. So it that gave me, I think, the courage to write more poetry, and that eventually led to a production deal at a very small record company, but that let me do whatever I wanted as far as poetry and recording Lower East Side poets was concerned. And we were all excited. It got reviewed in Rolling Stone, which was still a good magazine at the time. And
Are you throwing shade
what
there, Harold?
no. It's just the times, man. The times have changed, and you have to do different things to keep it going. But I think there is a crossover between journalism and poetry in one sense, and that is kind of organization. As journalists, we know the deadline. If we don't appreciate the deadline, there's no reason for us to be journalists, because that is kind of one of the primary rules of journalism. So that's a bigger thing in a way than I'm going to write this story today, because the story involves an editor. The poet involves you, and you are the editor. So that means to me that what we're kind of doing is using the rules of journalism and then throwing them out, because you have to free your mind, and your ass will follow when it comes to writing poetry, and I think anything fiction in general, right? I think that is what worked for me, right? It doesn't work all the time, but that's those are the analogies that I can make. And I would ask you, what is the difference then between writing for a Black Panther piece and writing journalism, and again, also, what are the similarities?
It's funny. Writing comics, um, there's a different kind of rigor, right? When you're writing journalism or critique, there's obviously this idea of in the moment, spontaneity. When you're doing an interview and you get a good moment, a real piece of insight from somebody, you want to capture that, right, and provide the context, right, while remaining, obviously honest and transparent about who the person is, the purpose that you're talking to them for, and what you want the reader to pull away from, right? So that's one kind of rigor. With comics, there is a formalistic kind of rigor too, whereas like things you learn about composing a comic book page is like, oh, do I have too many panels on here? How many panels should go in each, or rather, how many words should go in each panel? Like, how do I describe the action in a way that excites the artist and galvanizes the artist to, come up with a impressive camera angle or composition. There is a collaborative element to comics, which is really great. There's not the feeling of sending a script out and a couple of weeks go by and you start to get the art back in. There's nothing like that feeling in the world. Like every time, all the comics work I've done, and that's happened. It's been, oh right, this is why I'm doing this, because somebody's going to make pretty pictures out of it. Somebody is going to breathe life into these characters, and and that breath of life is going to contain the emotions and the feelings, and the themes and ideas that I want to convey, like hopefully, right? So the collaborative kind of dynamic is definitely different when you compare journalism and comics, right? Journalism, you can collaborate with an editor, you can collaborate with other writers, right? But the divide of me not being able to draw and the artist being able to draw is really vast, right? So to see like your words jump across that chasm and come and jump back with like these amazing images associated with them is really really great. So it's definitely different, and my consulting in video games has been even more different, because they tell stories in a different way than say comics do, or journalism does, uh, and you uh, have to think about where your words sit, um, and the words that kind of describe a gameplay moment or a cutscene, um, where they sit inside the mechanics, you know? So it's like, oh wait, Miles is swinging across the city. Does he have time to listen to this whole monologue that is being written, or does he have time for this whole exchange? So there's a premium on economy and brevity, and different kind of technical approaches that you don't always have to worry about in journalism. Like I'm somebody who tends to write long, especially in journalism. So it's like, oh yeah, you give me an infinite scroll, and I will use every turn of the mouse wheel to keep you reading, hopefully. But you don't have those kind of same affordances in comics or video games.
Yeah, I wrote a film that got made years ago. It was not very good. It wasn't my fault. I'm just the writer. But
Nice.
but but um, there's the idea of what you're talking about, which is the melding of art and words, is something that you think about when you're helping with film as well, right? So you're thinking of how to make it as tight as possible. So most often, I still think when you're writing dialogue, less is more. But there are times when you do go big on it, and it just happens when you because you're working with a team. You, in the case of both the video game team and an artist,
Yeah.
or and me in the case of like a producer and mainly a director. It's like, how are you, and then what direction are you giving as well, right? So are you giving direction to the artist? Like, do you ever say, oh, this would look really good, or do you leave that pretty much to the
No.
artist
So
themselves?
even within comics themselves, especially mainstream superhero comics, there are different disciplines, right? Like there's there's full script, which is what I've tended to do so far, which is you describe the actions, you describe the camera angles and the scene and what the characters are feeling, um, and then you write the dialogue. But there's also what's called the plot, the Marvel method or the plot method, which is you write the plot, you send it to the artist, right? And you're describing what happens in the scene, but you wait for the art to come back so you can write to the art, right? So like um, a specific expression in the character's face, right? Or a specific angle on a piece of the environment in comics, the setting or whatnot. And you write to that, right? The second method takes longer, but tends to feel, from what I understand, like more of a true partnership. I haven't done it myself, but other comics writers I know who have say like,
Yeah.
yeah, I really feel like you're collaborating. So, but yeah, when I tend to write full script because I feel like right now it's a method that suits me. I might change that um, as I do more comics work, hopefully. But like, yeah, and that's fun to me. Like, describing the look on a character's face and seeing it be interpreted. One example I like to talk about is when I was writing Rise of the Black Panther, the first issue. I wrote this big battle scene that was supposed to be a two-page spread, right? So like the pages are like together, and you read it across the pages. Um, I did two rookie mistakes. One was I didn't count my page turns, right? So like you start with the first page, like you open a comic, you put the cover away, and the first page is going to be on your right hand side. Um, I didn't count my page turns, so what I had written as a two-page spread really was broken up by a page turn. Um, that was not going to be a wide, like a double page spread. So that was rookie mistake number one. The two is I think um, I kind of described the flow of the action across the panels, but like didn't do that in a way where I guess the artist felt it was compelling. So I get the pages back. I'm like, that's not what I wrote. All prepared all prepared to be indignant, but it was like, oh, it's actually better. Like because the layout and the flow of images across the page like it's really the artist's purview, right? Like that, and that's where you got to back off as a writer and not be precious and be like, okay, you're gonna execute here. Um, and certain writers have certain strengths, certain things they like to draw better than others, and um, you know, if you know that ahead of time, it's great. You don't always, but I think clear directions in terms of the emotional um, moment and the action moment, the plot moment are important for a comic strip. You know, the thing about comics is that it's a still image, right? And I wrote a piece on 909 when I was still in the middle of writing Rise of the Black Panther, and the piece was things I didn't know about comics until I started writing about comics, writing comics rather. And you know, one of the things I talk about is you need to freeze the moment, right? In comics, you need to freeze a moment in the frame, right? You can't say the character walks across a room because you're not going to be able to show all that. That's like a bunch. That's a snippet of time. You have to say, you know, they stop, you know, and look at something, you know, like they're mid motion, they're like they're mid step, you know, as opposed to saying like you know they walk out the house. You're only going to be able to show select frames from that contiguous moment.
And that's what's, I mean, this is what's brilliant about you and brilliant about the comics you've done and brilliant about the comics that I've seen and read since I was a kid, like Swamp Thing and stuff. Even though it's that still image, you're sitting there imagining the movie in your head.
Yeah,
And the difference between the still image and what you're imagining in your head that is moving is not different. So that's what a great comic book writer and comic book artist can pull off. And I've read a lot of bad comics too that
yeah,
that
yeah.
do not do that, right? And you're wondering like was this done? One thing I wanted to get, because we'll wrap it up soon, but um, I want to get to tell people that if you do begin as a journalist and you do write books, that really does help you. That what you've, especially nonfiction books. So had the opportunity to write a book about serial killers with Dr. Helen Morrison, who's kind of like the real life Clarice from Silence of the Lambs. And she said to me, I don't really like journalists. And I said, well, consider me a writer. And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, let's work together for a little while and you'll see. And so um, I did take all the organizational stuff that I knew as a journalist, but I then took like what I loved about journalists that created almost a fictional atmosphere and put it in a first chapter for her based on like a brief conversation. And that worked, and it ended up selling hundreds of thousands of books. And some of that I did with All Your Base Are Belong to Us as well. That like setting a scene and putting a reader into that seems almost like what you're talking about with comic books, so they can imagine what's going on and visualize it is very important. And some of that stuff I learned as a journalist. But I think I want to wrap up. But I would like to ask you, Evan, how what suggestions do you have for people who want to be like you? Do you need an agent? What would someone starting out do right now?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't have an agent right now. You know,
Yeah,
it's something that I should do and um, plan to do. But right now, like I've been wrapped up in all my projects. Like, you know, finding representation is another project in and of itself. So I don't actually
yes.
have anybody yet. Um, I kind of feel like an amateur for saying that, but you know, that's just the way things have shaken out so far. Maybe this time next year that'll all be different. But
Yeah.
um, you know, the thing I always tell people when they ask me, like, you know, I think one we have to start by saying that our paths are not really easily replicable, right? They're not. you can't go out there and do what I did and do what you did and necessarily wind up in the places that we have, right? Like, it's not to say we're
Yes.
special or anything like that. It's a combination of luck, skill, right place, right time, right? Synchronicity. So all that said, um, the thing I do tell people, and probably the thing that they can replicate and work on, is figuring out why you like what you like, right? Like, if for me, you know, I always saw my job as a critic was to offer an informed opinion, right? Like, know what I can about the form, the genre, the media, about the creators, about their intent, what I can intuit about their intent, right? And then see how they go about executing it, right? Like, figure out how it works, why it works the way it does, what is it I like about the way it works, and then you have to ask yourself, like, the soul searching question of, can I do this? Can I write a piece of dialogue, or or describe a sequence that will touch somebody, or entertain somebody, or make them laugh, right? Like, figure out why the things you like work, what makes them tick, what the mechanics are, and then see if you yourself can replicate or even advance uh, those mechanics, right? Those particular um, elements that you like. One of my favorite comic book writers is Danny O'Neill. He unfortunately passed away last month,
Yeah.
but he was a former journalist. And the way he wrote dialogue and the way he paced stories, um, I would not necessarily say was influenced by his work as a journalist, but his work as a journalist put him in front of people and talking to people, and listen to specific rhythms of, like, of a regional dialect. I remember one time he wrote this character that spoke with a southern dialect. I'm like, you know what? This has a ring of truth to it. This doesn't sound too
Yeah.
stereotypical. It sounds like the way that people talk. And I
Yeah.
know he was able to nail that by virtue of listening to people talk, and then writing down their words, and you know um, in such a way that it would give you an insight into who they are and the character of their speech, right? And and that's the kind of thing that I strive for. There's something he said in
Yeah.
an interview a long time ago. He said, if you want to make comics, you got to bring something other than your love of comics into the medium, right? If all you got is you've read Superman and love Superman your entire life, it's not gonna be enough. You're just gonna make pretty standard ass Superman stories. But if you have some philosophy, or something um, that you can bring in to invigorate, like, the medium and your execution of the medium, like, that's what you should do, and that's what I try to do.
I think that's exactly right, Evan. And I personally would just add, um, first, there's we talked about soul searching. There's a lot of soul searching in being a writer, right? So don't everyone's scared. Don't feel like you're the only one who's a little frightened of it, right? And then the other thing is to respect yourself, and that means not to work too hard on things. Like, don't do too many
Yeah,
20-hour days. There are a couple of other things, like you don't necessarily need an agent right away. The key is to keep writing, write a little bit every day to work that muscle, like you would do a workout. Um, but also talk to people, and like I always hated networking because ultimately deep down I am an introvert. But talk to people, be nice. There are nice people out there that will help you. Some people won't, but don't take that as like this big negative. And
yeah,
if you get sad about something, there's nothing bad about stopping for a week or so and nursing your wounds. If you have to do that, that's okay. People say get up on the horse the next day. Man, this is some like macho white male bullshit there, because you have to take care of yourself as a writer, or else you can't write. Um, so there are tons of books about getting an agent and getting a book published. I do believe that being a journalist helped me write a good book proposal, which is something you have to do if you're writing a book, and write it so it can't be turned down. But ultimately, I just want to say thank you to Evan Narcisse, who's been my friend and helped me create the New York Video Game Circle, a critic circle, and he is the best. There's no one like Evan. And Evan, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Uh, I mean, the Critic Circle does important work, amazing work. I was glad to be there at the beginning, Harold. So thank you for being the kind of nucleus around which that organization formed. Um, and I mean, I can't take that much flattery in one intense dose. You know that. I'm trying to do the best that I can. I want to help and try to tell stories, kind of stories that I've been wanting to see, and so far I've been lucky in being able to do that. So yeah, uh, I was so glad to have this conversation with you. I hope the folks at Play NYC enjoyed it, can get something from it, and best of luck on your journeys.
Yeah, take care, everyone. Work hard, enjoy writing, and enjoy reading. Take care and enjoy play crafting.
Take care, guys.
Bye, guys. Take care, guys.